Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video. Um, Today, I'd like to discuss Spheres of Devastation by Somnus Dreadwood. Okay. Last night, I was doing a live video with a fellow admin, a fellow practitioner of paganism, and we were discussing the commonalities of religions, the art and the history, from a wide range of sources from the Bible to occultism to history and mythology. And we had touched on the Godhead. We touched on the image and how people view the depictions within grimoires. And one of which was right here in this book that we were discussing, where it talks, and I'm going to read real fast. Through defeat in warfare, disbanding their cult, their temples desecrated by rival deities, or through perversion of their doctrine by their faithful, a god or goddess may succumb to total spiritual death. Those who pass into dissolution or are in the throes of the final fade are taken to Nezrakarn by the Myranos, a sort of cult of silent spiritual dedicated pure, purely to tending to the divine tombs, regardless of the deity's disposition for good or evil, or whatever is chosen dominion may be. They function to serve as cosmic undertakers and groundskeepers. Once interred, they are kept there and mourned by none, for there is no longer worshippers to be found in the realms. Okay. Now, one of the things I found interesting about just this small little passage was that the Myranos worshipped the deitas known as the bull-headed god. Okay. In ancient Sumerian Babylonian, there was a, how should I say this, especially that of the ancient Greek, I should say, more to be precise, right on the island of Myranos, there was a culture that had a being that was like part bull and part human. He was kept into a dungeon where sacrifices were made to this being. But what I found interesting about the depiction of the underworld was similar to that of the gatekeepers like Anubis in Egyptian mythology. Ancient cultures depicted his art and his history as standing next to a vortex, a portal where the spirits of the reincarnated would be able to go to either the celestial realm or that of the shadow realms for the eternal resting. You know, there are those practices that talk about void magics, being cast out into the void. Look at Simon's Necromyicon. um, that of Donald Tyson's Necromyicon works, such as the 13 Gates, the Necromyicon, and all that stuff. And one of the stories and the myths behind them is that the daughter of the mad god Ahura Mazda was attacked, and she cast herself, or more to be precise, flung herself out into the Nexus, the void. And when they found her, she was already curled up into a ball with living organisms walking on the surface of her flesh, which also goes along with that of the story of Tiamat from the Enema Elish, also known as the first tablet. But what I found interesting throughout this depiction alone on page 35 and 36, this one paragraph, is that it literally talks about the void. It talks about that final resolution of rest, the final dirt nap, where these gods literally went to. There was no worshippers, no cults, no nothing. It's like the depictions of Azazel sitting in the middle of a darkened room or a void with a small light around him, just sitting there by himself. Nowhere to talk to somebody, nowhere to discuss anything with somebody. He just sits there contemplating, which is why he's associated and referred to as being the ancient darkness, especially that by E.A. Coetting and How to Become a Living God. But if you read Azazel's history, he's known as Jehovah's equal. He is a god. And he's also referred to in the book of Enoch as being the teacher of the arts, alchemy, even how to forge weapons, teaching women how to paint their faces. When we get into this book, though, it's more like a storytelling. It was very fascinating. But to be more precise, when you go down through the next two paragraphs, it talks about a constant warfare, a dark place, the cosmic god of death, which associates with Supe in Inca, you know, Anubis in Egyptian, Hades in Greek, Hell in Norse. So there's a lot of different gods and goddesses associated with death, but none comes to the depiction much like that of Anubis, the goat-headed man, not the goat-headed man, but the dog-headed man, the god who's responsible for the souls journeying to the land of the dead, where they're going, the road that they walk as they're journeying to that portal based off their own nature. Even Hans Holzer said that a warlock, based off his nature to either harm or heal an individual, only gathers the influenced conjurations and magical systems that speak to that individual. And I found it interesting that so many things go hand in hand with this book. And this one thing, and I want to read down through this real fast, these last two, so you get a better understanding. The realm itself is dark as it constantly constantly thrown beneath a new moon sky. Endless stars can be seen above, however, and this one depiction goes along great with the Bible, especially which was I want to say the book of Revelations, where it says that the third of the stars fell from heaven or from the sky, just disappeared. I had a vision a long time ago of almost like a cloud effect, and inside there was a moon or a planet that was bluish white. It had stars in it, but outside that bubble, like three-fourths of the sky was just black. Two hilltops, and in the valley, the in between them, it was like a glamour, almost like looking at water at night. Four rows of trees, 3 to 4 rows of trees in front of them, and you're looking kind of diagonal, which I found interesting because that was like a decade ago. And here I am reading this with a friend and fellow practitioner. And it was interesting because we were discussing this, and the more we got into it, we ended up getting into the mythologies. We started getting into the history, the art forms, the depictions of the beings and what they represent. We started going through the Bible itself, and because of the new podcast that we're doing together, it was fascinating because we were going through all the scripture that entitled God. What defines a God? What is the God's name? And in this, it's talking about the God of death. It's talking about the Lord of death. Like Anubis, Hades, Supe, and it's just like, okay, now we're getting onto something here, and we're discussing it. So all of this stuff is playing hand in hand here, and it's fascinating. So it goes on to say, and yet there is very little illumination. Now, and I started thinking about E.A. Koetting's viewpoint of Azazel and what he had witnessed him sitting in a chair, almost like Lucifer leaning against the rock, watching the serpent on the ground. The way he described him was there was darkness all around him, but very little illumination to show him sitting in the chair. So it was very, very fascinating. And the entire plane is quite massive, yet it appears like a massive graveyard, kind of like Papa Nebo or that of Baron Samedi, with the stone roads. Think Roman, the stone roads of the Roman Empire. And this part here is what got me thinking about Anubis, the stone road of where the souls of the reincarnate walk in a long convoy of souls, talking about heading towards that portal, and one by one they step up on the podium, the platform, and get sent to where they're supposed to reside. And it says tall spiked iron fences to line the boundaries of the plane, massive mausoleums and tombs for the interred deities. Now, when we think of how the 13 blight lords descended into the hells and how they became forgotten according to some of Dreadwood's works, but now they're actually making their comeback. They're making themselves known, and Somnus Dreadwood in the Cabal system is putting these works out after 800 years of keeping silent, keeping to themselves. And I look back at the 72 Goetia demons and how they were associated with the jinn and the spirits or angels within the Bibles, in certain Bibles. And it was very interesting to see the same numbers popping up: 72, 72, 72. And then you get into 13, and you start thinking, okay, why is 13 so relevant? 13 blind lords, 13 members to a coven. And it was very interesting because we started going along this route, just discussing it. And you'll see why here in just a second. Ghost lanterns or lanterns possessed by minor spirits create minimal light and travel designated paths around the grounds. Not all of the plain is set up in this manner, as some areas are quite putrid and serve no purpose to the good of interment. This is because the realm itself is built upon the corpse of the first cosmic god of death, a new, forgotten, and nameless husk. Many planar necromancers, treasure hunters, and black magicians come here seeking to siphon what they can from the fleeting essences of the death gods. Other divine entities do attempt to do the same, but this is often met with disdain and distrust from other deities. Okay, and I'm not going to finish that last paragraph because I want you to be able to go out and get these books and you'll read for yourself and discern for yourselves. But just from what I just read, we were discussing this and comparing it to other traditions, other forms, and seeing how Somnus Dreadwood, when he was writing this, it's almost like he's setting a trap, but also telling a story. His writing style is, how should I say this? It's intelligent. It's almost of a sense of one doesn't want to say superiority, but more of kind of like a trickster, like Mephistopheles or Loki. You know, when we think of these beings, you have to really be precise with your wordings because they will flip it around on you. These deities, they will flip your words back on you. Like, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, those of you who have worked with these beings, you know what I mean. But it's interesting to see how he warns people about this realm, you know, these realms, but also at the same time illuminating them, describing them in much of a method that can only be classified as the ancient Druidic storytellings. When we think Vikings, how were their adventures remembered through both song and story? You know, and this is ancient Anglo-Saxon, ancient, Celtic even. And it was very, very fascinating to me. And the more Stefan and I got into it, and it was very, very enlightening discussion just to see his point of view on some of Dreadwood's works. That of the Majra Cabal system. He's got a few books by Somnus Dreadwood, whereas I have all of them so far. And seeing where he's coming from and where I've seen. Now, personally, I haven't read this book all the way through. Not like he has, but it was kind of interesting because just to see his point of view of seeing it as a story, almost like a myth and a legend, kind of like that of Beowulf and Grendel, or that of Hansel and Gretel, even, just seeing that story. And, we were sitting there discussing this and we were watching this, we're reading down through it and it was funny because all of a sudden we just looked at each other and it's like, dude, we should be recording this. So it's like, damn, it was fascinating. I mean, how we were just sitting there talking and I know that through Heathen TV we're doing a podcast for Sunday mornings, now, and it was for the founders of this group, and it was very fascinating. And we were just sitting there discussing it. We ended up going into other areas, there other pantheons and other um, religious foundations such as voodooism and hoodooism, Santeria, Palo Mayombe, and you know getting into demonology, angelology, and history and art, and it was, mind blowing. So to read more on this book, I think a massive study should be done on this book here, just this one book, from the different realms, because that's basically what it is. It's the different realms and the different dimensions, the different um, multi-universal outlooks of the various different levels of reality, how they're seen, how they're viewed, their visual depictions, almost like art, but from the mind frame, to seeing how they coincide with the other books by Somnus Dreadwood. It's I know, and I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I realized that some of the passages in the other books weren't just by Somnus Dreadwood alone. I mean, in one passage may be Marcus, and another one it may be the Hellfire priests. But just to see the purity of the Cabal workings as a whole. Now, I've been studying Charnel Whispers. I've been studying a lot of the Black Scriptures and the rites of the 13 tongues. I've been getting into the sigils, and I'm going to show you these real fast. You know, Charnel Whispers. This book's on necromancy. You know, you have the rites of the 13 tongues by Somnus Dreadwood. The Black Scriptures by Somnus Dreadwood. Profane Seals. I found this book very, very awesome. I thought it was very well researched. I thought it was very well drawn, depicted, and displayed. I'm only about halfway through this book right now, just studying the definitions of each sigil. Even myself, I've only done a small handful of the rituals out of this because of how potent they are. But then you have the other two books, The Eye of the Oracle and The Left Hand, okay, which go hand in hand with this, the spheres of devastation, and going down through the consumed divinity, the mark for deicide, getting into aspects of godhood or the godhead, and that's just between 35 and 39. Okay, all right, just those few pages that I've read out of that book, just that book. You know, I had a question about something. I had posted something on something on Facebook, and somebody that's been following me now for probably the betterment of the last month and a half, she had commented on this section, page 35, and in the spheres of devastation, and how it was relating to the lords of death. And so I started delving into that. So when Stefan and I ended up getting into this, and we started branching out into other aspects, and the two owners, the co-owners of Heathen TV saw it, and basically the initial thing was a sit down with a Satanist, but you can't really do that, so they ended up naming it the Sunday morning Bible study with a Satanist instead. And he and I, he's not really a Satanist, but he understands Satanism. He understands the past. And we were sitting there discussing this, just sitting there discussing this on live camera, just talking. And then we did a 30-minute podcast on this and just started talking about it and going into it, just seeing where it led, the enlightenment, the illumination of it, and seeing how the different names, the fact that the Bible has 15 different entities in it. Seeing how the Kabbalah, the Hermeneutics, getting into the Norse pantheon, the Egyptian pantheon, the ancient Greek, getting into art and history, and seeing how they were depicted from Zazazel, the necromancer, Lord of Caractères, versus Anubis, Lord of the Dead in Egyptian, Supe, God of the Dead in Inca, Baron Samedi, the Loa of the Dead in Voodoo, Rudan even, seeing the God of the Dead himself, Papa Nebo, you know, in Hoodooism, and getting into Hades, the Lord of the Dead, seeing the different realms, and then getting into the um, the nine realms from Norse mythology, and just seeing how this is just flowing naturally between the two of us, and just the way we're discussing it and breaking it down, seeing what each other thought of it. It leaves a lot to be determined. It leaves a lot to be studied, to look into even. Do I recommend Somnus Dreadwood's books? Yeah, hands down. I recommend them. If you're interested in magic within its purity, within its enlightenment, within it in working with the gods on a personal level, and especially these 13 Blighting Lords, getting into the different realms. When we get into Dante's Inferno, for an example, just when we're talking realms, there are 13 levels according to Dante. You know, there are 9 forbidden sins. We know that at the very bottom of hell, according to Dante's Inferno, sits the devil. On the left hand is for all those who betray, and on the right hand, the most trusted, which goes along with that of the JCI perspectives of God versus Jesus and the Holy Spirit. So I mean, you see that resemblance within all of these traditions, but how can you compare them if you don't know what you've been studying? You know what I'm saying? I've been studying the Cabal system now for 7 months. Okay, 7 months, long months, and I've only practiced less than a dozen rituals from some of these books of some of Dreadwood, because just the few that I have practiced, that I have actually applied to my practices, ritual wise, using the words of the Chanel Whispers to call upon the lords themselves, trying to get in contact with a spirit guide, and all that stuff, see who is willing to work with me, much like the spirit house, or the spirit box in necromancy, that of the Nagunga, or the Niagara within Palo Mayumbi, which is basically the cauldron that the spirit resides in. Finding that patron. And I did this one ritual with a pure silver item. It was called the Arcane Ethereal Shield from the Rites of the 13 Tongues. And he was right. It didn't take very long. It probably took a little bit less than maybe 7 minutes max. And I actually felt it heat up. I felt it cool down. And I felt this surge of power run through it. And it was like, damn. I normally, when I do rituals to any demon or angel, I could be in my altar room for anywhere between 30 minutes to 4 hours. It could be repeated ritual works throughout not only the day, but throughout days, the weeks. For example, I've been working with Boone since the 28th of last month. Recently, as of this Monday, he has literally shined some light on an issue, and that revolved around an ambulance backing out of the dooryard and backing into my car. And it was funny because just seeing the similarities, the color, you know, the Black Witch's Coven considers gold to be associated with the metal for Bune, and whereas in demonolatry it would be silver. So I mean, blood offering or bloodletting would be something for an offering, whereas unleavened bread would be considered something else for him. But seeing the way this one book, Spheres of Devastation, The Unchained Sorcery of the Realms by Somnus Dreadwood, was written just in this one chapter, I really do have to concur because the way it's written is almost like he's being devious about it. On one hand, it's almost like he's weeding out the true practitioners from those of the fakes, the trolls, which is impressive in itself. Even I've done, even I do that within my own group, my own order. Even the groups that I'm in when it comes to being an admin or a mediator, you have to do what's best for the group. But when dealing with these deities, it's almost like the best way I can describe a deity would be Zaniel from the Grimoire of Armadale. He's the teacher of witchcraft. He's an angel. He doesn't come out and just start working with you like, say, Lucifer or Astaroth would do. No, he sits back. He wants to see what you're capable of doing. What are you willing to put into your magics? What are you willing to perform? Are you willing to adapt and grow? Are you going to go back over, you know, the material? The best way I can describe that part is E.A. Coetting to Simon's Necromyicon. He performed it and he didn't get anywhere, but after spending 3 months of studying the pages within the Necromyicon, he went back and got some massive results. And the best way I can say this would be that in this instance, the way Somnus Dreadwood wrote the Spheres of Devastation, and not just that, these other books as well, it leaves you wondering, is this what he's doing? Is he weeding out the strong from the weak? Is he weeding out the true from the fake? But at the same time, it's about the purity of the work, the magic, the sorcery, the communion with these blighting lords and the lords of and the deities of the minor and major deitas from the Karaktis and these other realms, from the towers. Working with, like, say for example, Zazel. You know, I spent an entire month and a half just calling on Zazel, and I'm still going over the feelings and the impressions that I got throughout that month and a half of just working with him. And it's kind of mind blowing because in some aspects it's like I've just gone in and done this ritual and done this ritual and done this ritual, adapting it and growing it and shrinking it down, trying to talk with him, to commune with him. In some cases, it's like you almost got that contact, that manifestation within your mind's eye, especially when you're meditating and you're doing a mantra. You're chanting the Chanel Whispers word to summon him. You may get a few visions in one or two different workings, but then you'll go days without even having any contact whatsoever. But then you see, when you look back and you start seeing how everything's incorporating, it's almost like a story. The way that this being here, this land, this sphere is described as a warring realm, a land of loneliness, a land of peace, of nothingness. Kind of reminds me of the expanse. What lies beyond the expanse but that of the black void, the nothingness. In meditation, when you're meditating and you get to that point where it's complete stillness, complete nothingness, no thoughts, no nothing. You just get into that frame of mind where it's just you in the void and you're drawing on that energy. Seeing the way that one chapter was manifested. Going into Shall Now Whispers. Reading and studying the death of the leash. You know, getting into the leech's wake, starting on page 138. After reading that several times, I thought about performing to doing it, but I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know where I should begin. Should I have somebody there when I did it? Or if I do it, I should say. So I went to Marcus and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing the leech's wake. How should I go about doing this?" And he said, "Get in touch with Somnus. Get in touch with Somnus Dreadwood. Let him know you're considering doing this." And I still haven't heard anything back from him on this, so I haven't really performed this rite, this ritual, to deaden the soul. Which means I haven't been able to get to the path working in the next chapter either, even though I'm studying that now. Getting into these other works, getting into all these different areas, and now communing with a fellow member of the Heathens TV and talking about the viewpoints of how everything was written, how it's perceived almost like a trap, but at the same time, the weeding out of souls. I really like that about these books. I like the way Somnus Dreadwood put these works together when he created these works, these grimoires. I really like that. But now that I'm actually viewing it within other aspects, there really is no comparison. You may see the similarities, you may see the commonalities. Many of you may see the Bible or the Quran as being stolen property from much older works. You may see it as corrupted or hypocritical, worthless pieces of paper that you done nothing but to wipe your anal with. So I mean, but it's got a lot of history there. It's got a lot of things that touch on it. Like what I read to you out of the Spheres of Devastation, the Land of the Dead, you can't serve two masters. You cannot serve God and mammon. But yet the Bible says that the devil shows himself as an angel of light. Satan is the god of this world with a little g. I am the Omega, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. But yet, and the Lord said, behold, here is man who has become like one of us, lest he reach forth and partake from the tree of life and live forever and ever as a god. Thalima Zapier Dietas, as Turk Suzej would put it in the demonic Bible. Going back to verse 5 in chapter 3 of Genesis, compared to verse 22. And it says, for he does know that in that time that ye eat, you'll become as gods, knowing good and evil. Seeing how these beings in the Cabal system workings by Somnus Dreadwood were actual beings, people, practitioners who pushed the limits of magic, who delved into the mythologies, the histories, new boundaries, new areas, deaden their souls and align themselves with these gods, these 13 Blighton lords, that they were so impressed that they gave them a rank, much like in demonolatry, where those who fought alongside Lucifer were given ranks for their loyalty, their endeavors when fighting alongside him through the revolution of heaven. Seeing the difference between the spiritual realm and the physical, the universal versus the multiversal, the microcosm versus the macrocosm. So many different aspects, so many different views to be considered here. I mean, the Cabal working stretches back 800 years to the 13th, 14th century and has remained pure, dedicated to the magics. But to see the story telling, it's almost like a narrator's view, but at the same time, it's speaking of experience. I like this. I really do. It's fascinating. This is what attracted me to occultism to begin with 29 years ago. This is what got my interest in magic, the various different sources, with everybody telling you that you can only serve this, you can't go into these others. And you're like, you're playing the heathen, you're playing the disobedient, you're playing the bad guy badge. Seeing, going against the norm. The spool of fish going one direction, and you're that one fish going upstream, going against the current, the warlock factor. Yeah, I can see this. And I want to know more. Even after 29 years of practice, study, seeing the application, forging these relationships. Yeah, there's been a lot of experience. I know where I've been, I know what I've studied. But these beings are constantly showing me new things. Spectacular. And I want to know more. Can you say the same? Go out and get these books by Somnus Dreadwood. Do your own research. Do your own workings within their past. Get in touch with the cabal. If that's a path that speaks to you, get into it. I'm not a member yet, but I have applied for adeptship. I've talked with Marcus. I've talked numerous discussions with him. He's a very wise man. But to see the applications, the outcomes of the discussions, such as this, seeing similarities in the depictions from art and history and mythology, the different pantheons which correlate with said workings. Yeah, there's a lot that goes into this, and there's so much more to delve into. The day you stop learning is the day you might as well hang up your wand and walk away. So many don't even research nowadays. It's more my way or the highway. They're set in their ways, and it's like, no. When I serve these beings, it's because I submit myself to them. It's because I choose to work with them. It's because I want to forge that relationship with them. This is this is how you gain knowledge and wisdom, friendship even. Just with the beings that I've worked with, I've seen over the years how all of a sudden, you just wake up and you see all these big fish, these sharks, and you feel like they're friends with you, sending you friend requests, and you kind of feel like a little pinto fish in a swarm of sharks. And it's like, what the hell did I do to get around these guys? Like Michael W. Ford, you know, S. Connolly, Jason Miller, Jason Augustus Newcomb, Raven Digitalis, you know, Lori Bruno, even, and who's a Strega, an Italian witch, getting in, looking around, and you're associated with former members of the Cathedral of the Black Goat. You've got publishers that you're friends with, and it's like, what the hell? I must have done something right to be given this blessing, this honor, to see the constant blessings that they're doing, to see what Boone's been doing in my life lately. Since I started working with him, I know a lot of people have suggested him to me over the last few months. One member of the Cabal, follower of the Cabal workings, actually suggested a being out of the Cabal, but unfortunately, I can't remember the being's name. I know he's from Caracas, but just to see it, it's mind blowing. It's fascinating. It's almost like it's kind of like that detonation of gnosis that just suddenly just appears, that illumination, that air of enlightenment. All I gotta say is I'm glad I have the time now to, with my new job, getting my order up and running, the associations where I'm able to commune with other people again as a coven setting who have the same goals in mind as myself, getting back into the gnosis, the studying, the teaching, the education. This is what I was made for. This is what I was created for. And I love it. I really do. I really love it. but I just wanted you to know the similarities, my thoughts of this one book, and how Stefan and I were discussing this just last night to see his views on it, his to hear his thoughts. It's mind blowing. I'm speechless. I can't even put the words in order just to see how we started out on this one book and ended up going into everything from the Dead Sea Scrolls to the various grimoires to art and history and mythology, various different traditions of magic. Damn. But anyways, have a good day, and I'll probably post on this later today. Probably do another video later today, if not tomorrow. All right. Have a good one.